Fred Wakeman, welcome to HR Brigham.
Thank you. It's good to be with you too in person.
Great. It's definitely something when you're called the secret weapon.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Little James Bonzi.
Absolutely.
Solving world crime.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Replace culture and stop the drama, right?
Yeah, it's all about ditching the drama.
Yeah.
It's such a good question because I think today HR really needs to examine not only its role, but how functional, how healthy, or how dysfunctional its role has been. And HR traditionally has fueled the drama according to our research. And it's been the go-between, but it's been the enabler, the reality bender. It's like, instead of just introducing you to reality, it's like, well, let me see if I can slow down that change, or let's see if I can enable that. And so I think from HR, we really have to look at what we do that fuels drama versus diffusing it, and step out of enabling roles, because we have become the big workaround for what others aren't stepping up to in leadership. So it's like leaders don't give feedback. HR is the workaround to bring in employee relations and do a step down meeting. It's like, nope, we've got to stop enabling. I think that's the biggest way we can step out of our old roles into our new roles. I think there's a couple big trends. And the first one is that people realize they've over-rotated on engagement. And they realize that they've gotten away from the evidence, because your circumstances aren't the key determinant of your happiness, i.e. engagement. I've got to start building in resilience and calling you up to greatness. And so I think that is one of the biggest trends I see, is that people are saying, you know what? We're glad to engage, but we know the same behavior doesn't please a low accountable and a high accountable, that we're going to only focus on engaging high accountable, so that you've got to come to the workplace with all of your great diversity, but one thing, no variance, high accountability, and then we will work to engage the heck out of that.
Got it. Accountability.
Accountability is really the key. Yeah. Well, I would tell you that I think that the millennials and the Gen Zs are really suffering from kill the messenger. They have a low tolerance for lack of efficiency. They have a low tolerance for, lack of readiness. And yet they're bringing this to our attention, and people are killing the messenger. And so, I love that they're pushing for change, and I think they're exposing those of us that are unready. And it is shown up in my company. I have everybody who works for me is under the age of 35. And I get that I should not be making the strategic decisions of the organization because I'm out of touch. But there's one thing we won't have variance on, and it's that no matter what your age or how you work, that you're accountable. Like there's no variance on accountability. And so I wrote a blog once. People were so upset about kids nowadays, and that they're always gaming, and how that's ruin the world. And I said, it's time out. From an HR perspective, those are the kids I want to hire. My kids do not wait for budget money to figure out how to buy a game. My kids are like, Mom, can I get a game in November? I'm like, well, the holidays aren't until December, so no. And they're calling my dad up, and they're like, hey, the trend right now is prepaid visas, and we can handle that for you through a Venmo account if you want to just put a little Christmas cash our way. Almost everything happening during gaming actually is a fantastic thing if we can channel it, except for those of us who can't game. And so the people critiquing the gaming are the ones not gaming. But judgment is going to be the first place that we step apart rather than leaning in. And if you can say with beginner's mind and no ego mind that I talk about a lot, then you can find ways to call people up to greatness and let them bring the diversity into how we work. But there's a super culture out there. When we're talking culture, if we're not careful, culture can become our agreed upon reasons, stories, and excuses about why we can't get there. People are like, oh, our culture doesn't support that, or we're Minnesota nice, or that's not culture. We've really even misused culture.
Sure.
The markets require a super culture. And it doesn't matter where any of us came from. It doesn't matter all the fabulous diversity and intersections we bring, in that we have to align to a super culture. And that super culture is no ego, low drama, high accountable, nimble change, ready for what's next. And that's the only place diversity and everything else can flourish. And we've been negotiating that, which is why most people's cultures are in a lot of trouble right now. Well, I think unfortunately, it's not forcing organizations to change. And that's my biggest concern, is that we are still saying things like change is hard. And I'm preaching it's only hard for the unready. So if Dickens has the same flip phone he's had since high school, and I never skip an upgrade, regardless of my age, when you bring us a new mobile platform we're both expected to use, I haven't skipped an upgrade. It takes me a few days of discomfort to get it going. He's curled up in the fetal position, wondering if we can get him a scribe for his phone and if there's super user training. And so what's happening with the technology is that people are so just in time. They're like, well, I need to learn this new technology because it's how we're going to pay now. No, you need to get technically savvy so that you're a funnel that whatever I put through you are able to figure out quickly. And so I think that, unfortunately, the younger generation isn't forcing us to have enough change. Like, I would really love for people technologically needing to retest for their jobs on a yearly basis to see if they're still qualified. And I think that would change a lot. Three things. First, you stop coddling the people. Growth comes in bite-sized pieces, but we let people skip upgrades. And then they're really far behind, and then we have to remake the workforce for them. And so that's all about not enabling people and with the readiness and all of that. So you stop coddling people and enabling folks. And then for me, it's all about, like, how do you foster readiness? You eliminate the third option. A lot of people, when a change comes, they'll say, well, I'm not on board, and I don't think that's how we should do it, and I'm not that skilled, and I'm not that willing to get the skills I need. And they think there's this option where they can stay and be unskilled or stay and resist. And so for me, when people are like, well, I don't like the new technology and I don't really want to learn to use it, I'm like, no, seriously, what's your plan to joyfully get fluent and on board? And they're like, I'm not gonna. I'm like, well, then what's your plan to transition off my team? And they're like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I go, great, I'd love to have you. What's your plan to get on board? And they're like, I'm not gonna. And I'm like, it's almost like you think there's a third option, that you can stay and skip this upgrade, that you can stay and hate or resist. Now, I'm all in if you're telling me this technology biases a certain group, or this technology limits access to, it puts people on the margins. Or if you've got a reason for that objection, let's talk. If there's risk you bring up, let's talk. Like, we're moving to a technology that half our customers won't have access to because they live in areas where they don't have internet. Let's talk. But most of the time, you just want your preference, your ego's preference, to trump potential. And we've got to eliminate this third option where we are pretending that we set the pace of change and that we can slow it down to keep people involved. And what's happening is we're marginalizing people almost on purpose for their lack of having kept up to date. And those people are fighting not to get marginalized. And last I checked, the people with the power don't worry about marginalization. You've got to keep current to keep yourself from getting marginalized. And you learn from people who are on the outliers that if you can control not ever getting marginalized, do that, because once you're excluded, it's a long haul to get back in and to get retribution for what happens. I think we have to pay attention to how consumable in the user experience. I just had Martha Bird, who's an anthropologist, on my podcast, and she talked about what anthropology can bring to really do some deep hanging out and really understand how people use technology. So I think the one thing that's important is if in technology, if something needs to be overtrained, it's probably not that usable to begin with. And so making sure that from a technological standpoint, the technology you put in is consumable, but also making sure that it's not a project or it's not something that we do in our spare time, that if you want people to have to use and adapt quickly to the technology, make sure that's the only way they can get their food and their pay and their daily living. Because there are some things like, I probably wouldn't be as fluent in the internet if it wasn't the only way to buy some of my favorite brands of shoes. But when they moved to only online shopping, I'm like, I will learn PayPal, baby. I'm there. And so I think that we have to not worry about how to make it easier for the people, but how to make it a regular part of their daily lives. It's so simple. It's like role model, lead the way. It wasn't that long ago, I was in a meeting where people were discussing whether folks could have their cell phones and have side gigs and be on Twitter and blog. And they're all worried about some of their employees blogging and having different brands on the side. And they were ready to make a policy. And I said, wait, how many of you have side gigs? What's your IG handle? How many of you are out on Twitter? And the people making the decisions, HR, of the 12, there was only one person that was out there doing it. So let's not critique and judge and mandate what you don't understand. So get yourself in there and get fluent and get out of the office and start hanging with influencers and finding out, what's going on social media. We went with a big strategy with Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a leader in social media, and our market's HR. And so we went with a big strategy on Instagram and Twitter, and we had a booth at SHRM, and we're like, hey, our best stuff is on Instagram. Follow us on Instagram, @Cy Wakeman. And we were helping people set up Instagram accounts. And these are the people. So not to belabor that, Kayla, but it's like, first lead the way, step up yourself, and then make sure that you're not working on catching the slow people up. Put a dream team together, break the curve. Don't put a mixed group in there. Break the curve with the early adopters. Show people what's possible, and then the business case becomes more compelling. I think some of it is do better math, because our ego makes it scary to push on people, but I want them to do the math of what it looks like 10 years ago when they didn't push on people. And as a leader, what I've done to your career when I let you skip an upgrade, when I let you sit this one out, because I'm failing you as a leader. And so if I am not insisting that my team gets really ready for what's next and tech savvy, and I'm afraid to push on them, I'm looking at the wrong part of the equation. I should be afraid not to push on them. That's what should horrify me. So I think it's getting mentally flexible. Instead of avoiding the conflict, which is your personal comfort, you should avoid the unpreparedness, which is a key competitive risk to your company. I think it's really about modernizing our leadership philosophy in that we need to realize that a leader's new role is to move energy away from why we can't to how we could. And it's not looking at change management as far as like what's convenient for the people, because right now change management is all about how to make it least disruptive to our employees, and we've got to focus on business readiness, how to make it least disruptive to our business. And so I think it's just continual calls to greatness and never resting. It's like siempre mejor, always better, relentless. There's so much good information out there on communications. We've got to just start looking at best practice and taking that best practice. So how do we get very clear about the messaging, and how do we use the many venues that we have to put messaging out there? And if you think across generations that we've been talking about, we continue to email people who don't read email. And then we shame them and they're like, well, they should read email, but they don't, and they get along fine. So why aren't we texting? Why are we being so stubborn that people have to abide by rules none of us ever agreed to? It's like if people text them. If people email them. If people consume on podcast them. But we still insist you come to 8 hours of training. And we asked our listeners, how do you learn? And they're like, we like 3 to 5 minute videos. We put them on YouTube for free. You won't come to a 2-hour training, but you'll spend 2 hours watching our 3 to 5 minute videos, binge watching on YouTube.
Right.
Why don't we just surrender and feed the people how they want to be fed? Yeah. Our non-negotiables should be accountability and deliverables. We should cater to how people like to consume. For me, and I'm in the training business, but I think we have to have a lot more shared accountability in training. Training as a department and learning development as the holders of the knowledge that need to be disseminated just seems to fly in the face of meritocracy and democracy. And I am like, learning and development and training need to craft messages and find easy, quick ways to learn and practice what we think will be helpful in the future based on data. But we really need to not just push it. We've got to get people pulling. And one of the best ways I like doing that is we train leaders in really good tools, and then we have them use it in their everyday life so that our trainers aren't the ones training. A lot of our development experiences are leader-led.